Welcome, everyone. It is Friday night, and we're about to get the party started. Hello. Anywho, I trust that everyone had a great day today, and that I don't know if you're ready for bed. I'm kind of sort of ready because this is usually around my bedtime, but um, tonight is about we're reading chapter 4 of The Law and the Promise by Neville Goddard. There is no fiction. Hey, Cyber. Hello, Gifted. I see you. Twitter is as Twitter is. But if you've ever read any of Neville Goddard's books, uh, you know how fascinating this stuff is. So I will do my best to be as sweet and serene as possible and not to get too excited. But I can't promise you. Anywho, I'm going to flip over because I'm on Fanbase on my iPad. Hi, Real Ruby. I see you here. I see you. Remember TikTok. I cannot see you. I don't even know if you comment. If you comment, I might see it. But other than that, remember, I stream too. I am that deal. Welcome, dearest. Remember that I see you only because I know you're there. But I don't actually see you because I'm streaming to TikTok. I'm not streaming from it. Yes? Anywho, I do prattle on. Let us turn to chapter 4. Now, fan base, don't take it personal. I flip over to iBooks and I read. So I don't see you. I don't see you until I come back. So, chapter 4 from The Law and the Promise. There is no fiction. Hmm. The distinction between what is real and what is imaginary is not one that can be finally maintained. All existing things are, in an intelligible sense, imaginary. John S. Mackenzie. There is no fiction. If an imaginal activity can produce a physical effect, our physical world must be essentially imaginal. To prove this would require merely that we observe our imaginal activities and watch to see whether or not they produce corresponding external effects. If they do, then we must conclude that there is no fiction. Today's imaginal drama or fiction becomes tomorrow's fact. If we had this wider view of causation, that causation is mental, not physical, that our mental states are causative of physical effects, well, then we would realize our responsibility as a creator and imagine only the best imaginable. Fable enacted as a sort of stage play in the mind is what causes the physical facts of life. Oh, let's say it again. I have to highlight it first, though, because it's awesome. Fable enacted as a sort of stage play in the mind is what causes the physical facts of life. Well, how do you mean? Let me slide in there for a moment. The most popular thing we do is to have these mental arguments with people. You know, we plan out what we're going to say, we plan out how we're going to cuss them out, we plan out how we're going to, have our witty comeback. That is fable enacted as a sort of stage play in the mind. Well, that is what causes the physical facts of life. Because if you continually do that, especially with the amount of intensity that you do, because you know you can't stand this person. So if you do that imaginal scene in your mind's eye of cussing them out with any kind of intensity, oh, you can guarantee that you're going to get the opportunity to cuss them out in quote unquote real time. You see, man believes that reality resides in the solid objects he sees around him. That it is in this world that the drama of life originates, that events spring suddenly into existence, created moment by moment out of antecedent physical facts. Oh, do you get what that means? Do you get what that means? Man believes that reality resides in the solid objects he sees around him. Yeah, but that's not true. The solid objects come from your mind's eye. When you get the idea to create a piece of content, where's the idea first? In your mind's eye. It's not solid yet. You haven't made the video yet. You haven't recorded it yet. You haven't bought the outfit yet. You haven't done your makeup yet. You've done nothing, but you've seen it in your mind's eye. And because you have seen it in your mind's eye, now you can do it. So, man believes that reality resides in the solid objects he sees around him. That it is in this world that the drama of life originates, that events spring suddenly into existence, created moment by moment out of antecedent physical facts. But causation does not lie in the external world of facts. The drama of life originates in the imagination of man. You know, my favorite story is to tell you about the ladies I watch who crochet, right? When you watch them crochet, they're not looking at a pattern. Because when I learned how to crochet, way back in the day, when I learned how to crochet, I had to follow a pattern, kind of like cross stitch. You know, you follow a pattern. They had this pattern in front of them that they watched. But when you watch these ladies on TikTok or Instagram, and they are crocheting, the last time I saw her, she crocheted a cardigan, you know, a sweater. She just really was just looking at what she was doing. There was no paper in front of her or anything. Where was she recreating it from? She was recreating it from her mind's eye. She was recreating it from her mind's eye, from the imagination. So it only became solid as a result of her following stitch for stitch for stitch from her mind's eye. That's the only reason why it became a solid object. So you see, causation does not lie in the external world of facts. The drama of life originates in the imagination of man. The real act of becoming takes place within man's imagination and not without meaning on the outside, yeah? The following stories, ooh, I love the stories. The following stories could define causation as the assemblage of mental states which occurring creates that which the assemblage implies. As within, so without. The foreword from Walter Lord's A Night to Remember illustrates my claim that imagining creates reality. In 1898, a struggling author named Morgan Robertson concocted a novel about a fabulous Atlantic liner, far larger than any that had ever been built. Robertson loaded his ship with rich and complacent people, and then wrecked it one cold April night on an iceberg. This somehow showed the futility of everything. And in fact, the book was called Futility when it appeared that year, published by the firm of M.F. Mansfield. 14 years later, a British shipping company named the White Star Line built a steamer remarkably like the one in Robertson's novel. The new liner was 66,000 tons displacement. Robertson's was 70,000 tons. The real ship was 882.5 feet long. The fictional one was 800 feet. Both could carry about 3,000 people, and both had enough lifeboats for only a fraction of this number. But then This didn't seem to matter because both were labeled unshakable. On April 19th, 1912, the real ship left Southampton on her maiden voyage to New York. Her cargo included a priceless copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam and a list of passengers collectively worth $250 million. On her way over, well, she too struck an iceberg and went down on a cold April night. Robertson called his ship the Titan. The White Star Line called its ship the Titanic. Near, far, wherever you are. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. I had to. But had Morgan Robertson known that imagining creates reality, that today's fiction is tomorrow's fact, would he have written the novel Futility? In the moment of the tragic catastrophe, writes, Schopenhauer, the conviction becomes more distinct to us than ever that life is a bad dream from which we have to awake. And the bad dream is caused by the imaginal activity of sleeping humanity. Imaginal activities may be remote from their manifestation, and unobserved events are only appearance. Causation, as seen in this tragedy, is elsewhere in space and time, far off from the from the scene of action, invisible to all, was Robertson's imaginal activity, like a scientist in a control room directing his guided missile through space-time. Who paints a picture, writes a play or book which others read while he's asleep in bed? Oh, the other side of the world when they o'erlook. His page, the sleeper might as well be dead. What knows he of his distant, unfelt life? What knows he of the thoughts his thoughts are raising? The life his life is giving, or the strife concerning him, some cavilling, some praising. Yet, which is most alive? He who's asleep, or his quick spirit in some other place, or score of other places that doth keep attention fixed and sleep from others' chase? Which is the he that sleeps, or the he that his own he that can neither feel nor see? This is an excerpt from the poem of Samuel Butler. Imaginative writers communicate not their vision of the world, but their attitudes which result in their vision. Imaginative writers communicate not their vision of the world, but their attitudes which result in their vision. Just a short while before Catherine Mansfield died, she said to her friend Raj, there are in life as many aspects as attitudes toward it, and aspects change with attitudes. Aspects change with attitudes. Could we change our attitude? We should not only see life differently, but life itself would come to be different. Life would undergo a change of appearance because we ourselves had undergone a change in attitude. Perception of a new pattern is what I call a creative attitude towards life. Prophets, wrote William Blake, in the modern sense of the word, have never existed. Jonah was no prophet in the modern sense, for his prophecy of Nineveh failed. Every honest man is a prophet. He utters his opinion both of private and public matters. Thus, if you go on and so, the result is so. He never says, such a thing shall happen, let you do what it will. A prophet is a seer, not an arbitrary dictator. The function of the prophet is not to tell us what is inevitable, but to tell us what can be built up out of persistent imaginal activities. Listen to what a prophet is. Because sometimes we think, back in the day, a prophet's going to tell you something that you don't know about yourself, that is some kind of mystery. But no, a prophet, he tells us not what is inevitable, but he tells us what can be built up of persistent imaginal activities. So a prophet is the one who can come along and observe you and your habit and tell you your destiny. Oh, it looks like magic, but nah, all he's doing is telling you, you see that behavior? You keep it up, this is what your life will look like. That is a prophet. He reads your habit, your present moment. What do you do habitually? So he sees what you do and he tells you, well, you keep that up. Well, this is what you shall become. You see, the future is determined by the imaginal activities of humanity, activities in their creative march, activities which can be seen in your dreams and the visions of your head as you lay in bed. Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, in the true sense of the word, like this dancer who now, from the summit of his realized ideal, sights yet higher peaks that are to be scaled. After you have read this story, you will understand why he is so confident that he can predetermine any materialistic future he desires, and why he is equally sure that others give reality to what were otherwise a mere figment of his imagination. That there exists and can exist nothing outside imagining on some level or other. You see, nothing continues in being save what imagining supports. Should I say that a little slower? Nothing continues in being save what imagining supports. The mind can make substance and people, planets of its own with beings brighter than have been, and give a breath to forms which can outlive all flesh. Do you understand what that means? The mind can make substance and people, planets of its own with beings brighter than have been, and give a breath to forms which can outlive all flesh. Last time I checked, the statue of David, it is safely secure now, but the gold leaf that it was in was eroded by the weather. But it does what? Where did it come from, that statue of David? The mind of Michelangelo. So the mind can make substance and people planets of its own with beings brighter than have been, and give a breath to forms which can outlive all flesh. The person who designed Queen Victoria's wedding dress, I think it is Queen Victoria, or is that Queen Elizabeth? I forget which queen it is. The reason I share the story is not just because they're queens, but because it says the mind can make substance and give breath to forms which can outlive all flesh. Their dresses are still hanging in Buckingham Palace on display. It is the mind that gives substance. Your mind gives substance. It says, as my story begins, at the age of 19, I was a mildly successful dancing teacher and continued in this static state for almost 5 years. At the end of this time, I met a young lady who talked me into attending your lectures. My thought upon hearing you say imagining creates reality was that the entire idea was ridiculous. However, I decided to accept your challenge and disprove your thesis. I bought your book Out of This World and read it many times. Still unconvinced, I set myself a rather ambitious goal. You see, my present position was an instructor with the Arthur Murray Dance Studio, and my goal was to own a franchise and be boss of an Arthur Murray studio myself. Now, this seemed the most unlikely thing in the world, as franchises were extremely difficult to secure. But on top of this fact, well, I was completely without the necessary funds to begin such an operation. Nevertheless, I assumed the feeling of my wish fulfilled as night after night, in my imagination, I went to sleep managing my own studio. 3 weeks later, a friend called me from Reno, Nevada. He had the Murray studio there and said it was too much for him to cope with alone. He offered me a partnership, ooh, and I was delighted. So delighted, in fact, that I hastened to Reno on borrowed money and promptly forgot all about you and your story of imagination. My partner and I worked hard and were very successful. But after a year, I was still not satisfied. I wanted more. I began thinking of ways and means to get another studio, and all my efforts failed. One night, as I retired, I was restless and I decided to read. As I looked through my collection of books, I noticed your slender volume, Out of This World. And I thought of the silly nonsense I had gone through 1 year ago before getting my own studio. Wait, getting my own studio? The words in my mind electrified me. I reread the book that night, and later, in my imagination, I heard my superior praise the good job we had done in Reno and suggested we acquire a second studio as he had a second location ready for us if we desired to expand. Well, I reenacted this imaginal scene nightly without fail. And 3 weeks from the first night of my imaginal drama, it materialized almost word for word. My partner accepted the new studio in Bakersfield, and I had the Reno studio alone. Now, I was convinced of the truth of your teaching, and never again will I forget. Now, I wanted to share this wonderful knowledge of imaginal power with my staff. I tried to tell them of the marvels they could accomplish. But I was unable to reach many, although one fantastic incident resulted from my efforts to tell this story. A young teacher told me he believed my story, but said it would have probably happened anyway in time. He insisted the entire theory was nonsense, but stated that if I could tell him something of an incredible nature that would actually happen and which he could witness, well, then he would believe me. Well, I accepted his challenge and conceived a truly fantastic test. The Reno studio is the most insignificant in the entire Murray system because of the small population count in the city itself. There are over 300 Murray studios in the country with much larger populations, therefore providing greater possibilities to draw from. So my test was this. I told the teacher that within the next 3 months, at the time of a national dance convention, the Little Reno studio would be the foremost topic of conversation at that convention. Well, he calmly stated that, well, that's quite impossible, you know. You can't do that. Well, that night, when I retired, I felt myself standing before a tremendous audience. I was speaking on creative imagining and felt the nervousness of being before such a vast audience. But I also felt the wonderful sensation of audience acceptance. I heard the roar of applause. And as I left the stage, I saw Mr. Murray himself come forward and shake my hand. You see, I reenacted this entire drama night after night. It began to take on the tones of reality, and I knew I had done it again. My imaginal drama materialized down to the last detail. My little Reno studio was the talk of the convention, and I did appear on that stage just as I had done in my imagination. But even after this unbelievable but actual happening, that young teacher who threw me the challenge remained unconvinced. Lot of mercy. Can't please nobody, can you? He said it had all happened too naturally. Uh-uh. And he was sure it would have happened anyway. Well, I did not mind his attitude because his challenge had given me another opportunity to prove, at least to myself, that imagining does create reality. And from that time on, I continued with my ambition to own the largest Arthur Murray dance studio in the world. Night after night in my imagination, I heard myself accepting a studio franchise for a great city. Within 3 weeks, Mr. Murray called me and offered a studio in a city of 1.5 million people. And it is now my goal to make my studio the greatest and biggest in the entire system. And of course, I know it will be done through my imagination. Signed by EOL Jr. EOL Jr. has a channel. His is it his grandson? EOL Jr., the grandson, Cyber, that has a YouTube channel? Indeed. So, imagining, writes Douglas Fawcett, may be hard to grasp, being quicksilver like. It vanishes into each of its metamorphoses and thereby displays its transformative magic. We must look beyond the physical fact for the imagining which has caused it. For 1 year, EOL Jr. lost himself in his metamorphosis, but fortunately, he remembered the silly nonsense he had gone through before getting his own studio. And he reread the book. So that's correct. So Elmer O. Locker, is that what it is? Elmer O. Locker? So his grandson has a YouTube channel. 6 degrees of separation. Neville Goddard is a Bajan just like me. And I used to shop at his family's grocery store. You got that right. So you see, how did we get here? But I digress. While I take a sip of water. So, imaginal acts on the human level need a certain interval of time to develop. But imaginal acts, whether committed to print, ooh, or locked in the bosom of a hermit, will realize themselves in time. Now, I know that you're in this space. I'm not going to call your name, but you did send me a message tonight, did you not? I'm going to read it again. I'm going to read it again for you. Imaginal acts on the human level need a certain interval of time to develop. But imaginal acts, whether committed to print Does it matter what color ink you write with? No. Whether committed to print or locked in the bosom of a hermit, they'll realize themselves in time. So you see, tonight, it doesn't matter if you write it down. Do you believe what you're writing to be true? I didn't have time yet to respond to part two of your message, but I will respond when I'm done live. I love you. I can say that. Listen, test yourself if only out of curiosity. Remember Elmer O. Locker Jr.? Remember the first thing he said was, man, that's nonsense. That stuff doesn't happen. But he tried it anyway because he wanted to disprove it. So tonight, test yourself if only out of curiosity. You will discover the prophet is your own imagining, and you will know there is no fiction. Hello? There is no fiction. This is one of my favorite things that he says. He said, we should never be certain that it was not some woman treading in the winepress who began that subtle change in men's minds, or that the passion because of which so many countries were given to the sword did not begin in the mind of some shepherd boy, lighting up his eyes for a moment before it ran upon its way. William Butler Yeats wrote that. What does it mean, treading in the winepress? I was in a room tonight with a gentleman, and some of the most beautiful women that I've ever met, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, came into that room. And I said to myself, well, if this is not a case of cause and effect, I don't know what is. What is it that he asked to know? That he spiritually summoned these women? You think that because you are thinking in your mind's eye that you don't affect things that are going on around you, that is what it means treading in the wine press. You're treading in the wine press, and all of a sudden you stop and you say, ooh, I really would like some roses and some chocolate and a nice bowl of soup tonight. And somebody somewhere says, I feel the need to pick me some roses from my garden. Oh, look, I just made some chocolate and some soup. And you know, Mrs. Smith down the street, she's been on my heart for a while because I know she's been going through it. I'm going to take her these things tonight. That is an example of treading in the wine press. The person who picked the roses and made the chocolate and the soup made them, but they don't know that it was Mrs. Smith treading in the wine press who said, well, Lord, I sure could use a bit of chocolate tonight and some roses to brighten up my space and some soup to warm the cockles of my heart. I hope you understand what that means. But anywho, there is no fiction, Brandon. Imagining fulfills itself in what our lives become. And now I have told you before it takes place, so that when it does take place, you may believe. You see, the Greeks were right. The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men, but they have fallen asleep and do not realize the might they wield by their imaginal activities. Real are the dreams of gods, and smoothly pass their pleasure in a long immortal dream. E.B., an author, is fully aware that today's fiction can become tomorrow's fact. In this letter, she writes, you know, I love it when people write Neville Goddard. Oh, that's all I can say. She says, Neville, one spring I completed a novelette, sold it, and forgot about it. Not until many long months later did I sit down and nervously compare some facts in my fiction with some facts in my life. What do tell? Please read a brief outline of my created story and then compare it with my personal experience. The heroine of my story took a vacation trip to Vermont, to the small city of Stowe, Vermont to be exact. When she reached her destination, she was faced with such unpleasant behavior on the part of her companion that she either had to continue her lifetime pattern of allowing another's selfish demand dominate her, or to break that pattern and leave. Hmm. She broke it and returned to New York. Then she returned, and the story continues. Events took shape in a proposal of marriage, which she happily accepted. Oh my. From my part of this tale, as small events evolved, I began to remember the dictates of my own pen and insignificant relationship. This is what happened to me. I received an invitation from a friend offering me a vacation at her summer place in Vermont. I accepted and was not startled at first when I learned her summer place was in the city of Stowe. When I arrived, I found my hostess in such a highly nervous state. I realized I was faced with either a wretched summer or the choice of walking out on her. Well, do tell. Never before in my life had I been strong enough to ignore what I thought were the claims of duty and friendship. But this time, I did, and without ceremony, returned to New York. A few days after I returned to my home, I too received a proposal of marriage. But at this point, fact and fiction parted. I refused the offer. I know, Neville. There's no such thing as fiction. I wonder why she refused the offer of marriage. What did she write in the book? Anyway, forgetful is green earth. The gods alone remember everlastingly. By their great memories, the gods are known. Ends run true to their imaginal origins. We reap the fruit of forgotten blossom time. In life, the events do not come up always where we have strewn the seed, so that we may not recognize our own harvest. Events are the emergence of a hidden imaginal activity. Hmm. Events are the emergence of a hidden imaginal activity. As much as you may want to rail against that, carry on. Just listen. You see, man is free to imagine whatever he desires. Man is free to imagine whatsoever he desires. This is why, despite all fatalist and misguided prophets of doom, all awakened men know that they are free. They know that they are creating reality. Now, is there a scriptural passage to support this claim? Ooh, yes, there is. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. William Butler Yeats must have discovered that there is no fiction. For after describing some of his experiences in the conscious use of imagination, he wrote this. If all who have described events like this have not dreamed, we should rewrite our histories for all men. Certainly, all imaginative men must be forever casting forth enchantments, glamours, illusions, and all men, especially tranquil men who have no powerful egotistic life, must be continually passing under their power. You get what that means? The person with the stronger imagination causes the one with a quote unquote tranquil. Not tranquil as in peaceful because you've cultivated inner peace, but tranquil as in, what do we call them? NPCs, non playable characters. Yeah, that's what we call them. It is the imaginative one. And it's funny that we say that because, James, darling, I see you. It's funny that we say that because this morning I said to you, this is how COVID happened. Humanity allowed the imagination of a select few to influence their entire existence. And we think that the principles don't exist. You think the principles don't exist? I keep telling you, the moment you argue with somebody in your mind's eye, and why do I use argument? Because that's what we tend to do. We argue with people in our minds. We debate with people in our minds so that when we get on the stage, we can debate. Now, I don't practice debating because I don't debate. I don't have to debate with you. I don't make the principles, but we all live by them, and I rest in that. You will come to understand it on your own. Why? Because every man awakens in their own time. I don't have to prove it to you. You will come to know it. So why should I? I don't need to debate because you will come to know it all on your own. And that, my friends, is the beauty of the grace of God, yes? But not God the way man has distorted the view of God. But that's another day. Our most elaborate thoughts, elaborate purposes, precise emotions are often, as I think, not really ours, but have on a sudden come up, as it were, out of hell or down out of heaven. Did you understand what he means? You could be anywhere in this world, and an emotion or a purpose or a thought could overtake you. Now, depending on the nature of that thought, if it harms, well, then clearly, as he would say, it comes, as it were, out of hell or it comes down out of heaven. That is a case again of treading in the winepress. Where did you get that thought from? Did you just run with it? Or did you examine yourself to see? That's what he's saying in that very line. He's saying to you, our most elaborate thoughts, elaborate purposes, precise emotions are often, as I think, not really ours, but have on a sudden come up, as it were, out of hell or down out of heaven. And I'll give you an example. Uh Galen, is it? That's her name. Oh my gosh, she's so sweet. She really is. And she's got a lovely smile, by the way. She invented something called the harmonic egg. An egg, as we know, is oval shaped. It's got the 2 points. Yes, oval. And when you get into this egg, sound is played and so is light. But as we know, sound travels and so does light. And it travels from one point to the other. And I know she can, you know what? Mm, how about I invite her and have her come and tell you all about it? But she was triggered in my mind's eye because of this statement. Our elaborate purposes, either they come out of hell or they come down from heaven. And this device that she created, the harmonic egg, if you hear people tell you their testimony, things they were dealing with for years, they aren't dealing with anymore. You see, her desire was to assist humanity and to heal, to spread love. I'm just Paraphrasing, but I will have her on here. Don't ask me how. Call those things that are not as though they were, and they become. Okay, that's all I can say. But what she was moved by was love and compassion for humanity. And thus, she built something to aid humanity in their healing. So now you can compare the two when Neville says these elaborate purposes are not sometimes ours, but they come from either the bowels of hell or from mm, heaven itself, the summit of heaven itself, right? So her desire, her purpose was to bring about healing, thus the harmonic A. So now you can think of somebody else who did something very similar. Oppenheimer. He was tasked with a missive, and it was not to bring about life, was it? It was not to bring about healing, was it? Thus, in our history, we have Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So you see, today, my beautiful friends, the way we use our imaginative faculties, the way we use our imagination has an effect on the world round about us. So if your desire, choose. You could be like Gail, or you can be, well, you can be like Oppenheimer. But either way, you will follow through because imagining creates reality because there is no fiction. You see, when a writer writes a story, they embody their character. Well, that's what Shakespeare, think about Shakespeare, greatest writer, allegedly. Uh, look at what he wrote. He would always say, as Hamlet, or to be or not to be? That is the question. That is what humanity always struggles with. Do we or do we not? Are we or are we not? That's humanity's struggle with themselves. But he also did say in the lips of Portia, if I could be but one of the 20 to take my own advice. So you see, he's writing what we all go through. So writing is not fiction. You draw it from somewhere. And scripture would tell us that we draw our fiction from the abundance of our hearts, is what scripture would say if you read scripture to comprehend it. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So when you write what you write, you are writing from the very heart of yourself. Thus it is true. So there's no fiction. So I will read that final paragraph for us. Our most elaborate thoughts, elaborate purposes, precise emotions are often, as I think, not really ours, but they have a sudden onset and they come up, as it were, out of hell or down out of heaven. Why? There is no fiction. Imagine better than the best you know. Imagine better than the best you know. And who's the first great imaginer? I'll give you a clue. Let there be light. And there was. That's the first great imaginer. You think you're separate from that? The principle of correspondence would tell you that as above, so below. The creator imagined. So you imagine. So you see. We don't always agree. We don't always see eye to eye. But at least once in our lives, and if it hasn't happened to you yet, hold on, it's coming. Sorry, Isaac. I had to throw that one out there. Don't sue me, Isaac. I digress, because Hold On, I'm Coming is his father's song. I digress. Um, sorry, I laugh at my own self. But then you imagine, right? What do we tell children? Or how do we describe it to children? We are making believe as we imagine. You're making believe. Do you see what you're doing to yourself on a daily basis? Oh, but Jesus will save me. Not if you sit there talking about I'm nothing. How you gonna be? Then Jesus or Scripture would say, "Let the weak say, I am strong." So what's that telling you? It is telling you if you are told, "Let the weak say, I am strong." Well, then you must say, "I am strong." But then you have to remember the caveat as to when you say, "Let the weak say, I am strong." And what is that caveat? Whatsoever ye ask for in prayer, believe. Whatsoever you ask for in prayer, believe. If I ask you for water, I believe you're going to give it to me. So that's why you ask, because you know you will get. So knowing is believing. Oh, hello. It is simply an observation. Because if you ask me, if you come and ask me for something, you believe that you're going to get it. Or else why would you ask me? You don't ask me in the hopes that you'll get it. You ask in the knowing that I will give it to you. This is why when I call my father, Daddy, I always pull a Hillary, off of Fresh Prince. Daddy, can I have $300? I always ask my dad because I know he's going to give it to me. So I wouldn't ask George because I don't know George. So when you whatsoever you ask for in prayer, prayer is synonymous with God and going to God. So if you know that you have to ask for something in prayer, well then you better believe that God is going to give it to you. Why else would you go to God? Why else would you go to God? Hmm? Because you're bored? No, because you believe. Because you believe. Oh, anywho, there is no fiction. Imagine them the best you know. You see, we like I told you this morning, we are so good, humanity, at imagining the worst case scenario. We imagine the worst case scenario on a daily basis without realizing that imagining creates reality. Because when you imagine the worst case scenario, what's the first thing you say when it happens? Oh my God, I knew this was gonna happen. But yet, when you are quote unquote challenged with imagining the best or better than you know, well, I can't do that. That would be arrogant for me to want the best in life. But it's okay for you to have the worst. You know what? How about we just slide into silence for 5 minutes, okay? Because if I have to expand on that tonight, it will not end well for anybody because I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to me. How many times have I sat there and gone through all the worst things that I could possibly imagine? And then when one of them happens, I'm crying. I just did it. I just breathed life into the worst case scenario. You see, you are life. So what are you breathing you into? Best? Better than you know? Or worst case scenario? Hello? Who was rhyming like a poet and didn't know it? Oh, this is only water in my mason jar. I'm being so for real when I tell you tonight. This is what we do as humanity. Thy word I have hidden in my heart that I may not sin against you. Is King David. Those are not idle words. When you hide something in your heart, it means you can draw upon it at any given time to apply it. So then that is what you do, isn't it? Sha. As we go into the silence for 5 minutes, tonight, allow your curiosity to be aroused. Your curiosity. So that you will say to yourself, wait a minute, I know she crazy, but I really want to see, because I know last time I thought about somebody, they called me. That happened to me at least 4 times today. Thinking about somebody and they call. You know my line of work. I answer the phones and I book appointments. And I thought about them and they called me. I thought about that technician, they called me. Sometimes even before the thought was completed. There is no fiction because imagination creates reality. So, what are you imagining tonight? So, as we go in, as we slide into the silence tonight, don't you want to know what you're capable of? Do you not want to know how you can change your life? Do you not want to know that you don't have to suffer anymore? Do you not want to know that you can do it? Well, as Granny would always say, I can't know for you. You got to know for yourself. So, what are you going to do? We'll take these 5 minutes of silence to make a decision whether you will be the imaginative man, to know that imagining creates reality, or you just gonna go along with somebody said to you. You better, scripture says to test me. Who is me? It's not Jesus who's doing it. So if it's not Jesus who's performing the test, who is it? It's you testing yourself to see what you are capable of. Let us slide into 5 minutes of silence. And there concludes our 5 minutes of silence. Test it out for yourselves tonight, my beautiful friends, so that you can have the experience for yourselves. It is always about the experience. That is what we seek, the experience of God. We seek that. Mm. I love you. And for everybody else, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, I'll see you guys on Monday, the crack of dawn, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. But if you are on Fanbase, you know where you're going to find me tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right? You'll find me on Fanbase. Anywho, I love you all. Good night, my beautiful friends. Good night.